Hello, everybody. Welcome to the county seat. Today, I'm your host, Chad Booth. We're bringing you an episode from the Utah State Capitol in the boardroom. Today, our topic is going to be public lands and the transfer of public lands to the state. It's been a hot topic here for a couple of years, and it really came to a head last year with the passage and signature of House Bill 148. That will be our topic of discussion today. But first, let's take a little bit of a look at the history of land access and Utah's journey into statehood. It all started in 1896 when Utah became a state. Since that time, though, Utah has struggled to receive those same rights, particularly in the case of public lands. The Constitution and our enabling documents provide a clause that turns federally controlled lands over to the states. But with Utah, that never happened. With 67% of the Beehive State federally owned and managed, a variety of problems have arisen for the counties, cities, and the state as a whole.
As the federal government increasingly becomes more and more restrictive, it's harder for companies to have good-paying jobs, to develop resources, and therefore it's harder to live in rural Utah. It's harder to fund schools. It's harder to fund infrastructure development, roads maintenance. The list goes on. And so lack of access to public lands is a huge deal to rural and even metropolitan Utah.
The federal government's original intention for the vast undesignated lands of the West was to dispose of them once a territory was admitted to the Union. But shortly after Utah became a state, there was a shift in policies towards conservation and what some people would call protectionism.
Well, what happened was you had the Lands Agency and you had the Grazing Agency, and they were working together. Most of it was disposal action to dispose of the public lands. And then in '76, Congress passed the Federal Land Policy Management Act, which said it will now be the policy to retain these lands in ownership, with lots of promises.
I think it just finally reached a point where a lot of the very restrictive policies that we've dealt with in this country were created in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. And it took a while before those things kind of fully integrated into the agencies and began to impact people on the ground. The real problem is that now these things have become to impact us in a very meaningful and harmful way.
Changes to how public lands were managed began to affect traditional uses for grazing, mineral extraction, even recreation. Now, this eventually led to the formation of a series of movements, starting with the Sagebrush Rebellion and morphing into Take Back Utah. The first thing most people unfamiliar with the land access battle ask is, who are we going to take it back from? Well, that's a fair question.
Well, it's not so much taking back anything, it's we need to get more control of what we were promised.
We started doing more and more research about the history of land policy. We began to realize that, well, maybe there is a way that we actually can, and even in fact should, own and manage the lands in our state. And that movement has kind of progressed to where we passed legislation in the previous year to begin a process to tell the federal government, that land should be the state of Utah's.
Take Back Utah is for all Utahns. It involves any use, multiple use of the public lands.
And I think we've been able to accomplish that by having our rallies, having the parades where we go up to the Capitol and let the legislators know that there is a group of people out there, the silent majority, that really do want to have a say in how these lands are managed.
And now we have the attention of the legislature and the governor, and now our show is on the road. Other states are doing what we're doing, and so it's not just Utah. So this thing has become magnified, and that's the message that, hey, the public have a stake in this, and the feds, you need to listen to those who are closest to the land, and they got to do it right now.
I have probably 90% support from my colleagues up here, and that's a bipartisan support. They understand what taking control and managing these public lands can do to help the revenues for this state, the revenue shortfalls we're seeing.
Utah has been a leader on this issue, and all the folks out there that have supported the Take Back Utah and USAL and the other organizations that have contributed, they should pat themselves on the back. They should be happy about what we've done, but there's still a lot of work left to do. We have to convince our friends and colleagues in other states to do the same thing, and that process is going on right now.
The Take Back Utah movement isn't as much about taking anything back as it is reignition of a debate that has gone on since the United States became a nation as to how lands would change hands from federal ownership to the states at statehood. Sometimes it requires states to push back and remind the federal government about the promises that were made when they were admitted to the Union. When we come back, we will talk to our panel about House Bill 148 and the impacts that it has had across the state. We'll also look at how it's received in Washington, D.C. We'll be right back with the county seat.
Good morning. If you're just getting up, it's a cold one out there today. Lots of snow and the commute is ugly.
Grief.
Don't you wish that you were somewhere else? Somewhere else?
Escape from your world and find another in Kanab, the perfect destination for adventure, history, and exploration that can be enjoyed any time of the year. Don't let Mother Nature keep you holed up all winter when you can escape anytime and enjoy the best that Utah has to offer. Come to Kanab and see what we mean.
Industry is the symbol of Utah. Beauty is what makes it unique. Nowhere else are these two qualities exemplified, like in Uinta County. Oil and gas extraction, pioneer history, the spirit of hard work and integrity that feed our state. Built in the middle of the most spectacular backdrop in the West. Isn't it time you found the balance you've been looking for? Uinta County, Utah, where industry meets inspiration.
How would you spend an extra day in Utah Valley? Stay one more day. Visit utahvalley.com to make reservations. Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
What do you picture when you hear Rich County, Utah? Bear Lake Adventure? Snowmobile action? Pristine skiing? Spectacular solitude? Well, if that isn't what first came to mind, then you just don't know Rich County. The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge, snowmobiling Monte Cristo, ice fishing Bear Lake, skiing the backcountry, fishing at the Cisco Disco. Come and find out what you never knew you were missing. Rich County, Utah.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today is the Transfer of Public Lands Act. It is going into its second legislative session here in the Utah, and it seems to be a fire that spread its way across the West. Joining us for our conversation today, Commissioner Doug Heaton from Kane County, Utah, Representative Ken Ivory, the Utah State Legislature, and Senator Mike Lee, U.S. Senator for the state of Utah. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. Let me just start at the top and work my way back down. Senator Lee, what has been the reaction of your colleagues back in Washington about the passage of this bill?
Well, like Washington's reaction to most issues dealing with federal public land, it hasn't been much of a reaction at all. There's widespread ignorance within Congress about the fact that the federal government owns about 30% of the landmass in the United States, and that in many states like ours, the federal government owns 2/3 or more of the land. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is help people understand this disparity and understand why that matters, understand why that hurts people like Commissioner Heaton, who have to run a county government based on limited funds because they can't tax most of the land in their county.
Commissioner Heaton, from that standpoint, how strapped does, particularly the monument and the fact that you have so much federal land, how much does it hurt the economy of Kane County?
Well, picture yourself in a situation where you've got a county that is 90% owned by the federal government. The state lands are another 5%. So we have 5% of the land mass of Kane County to tax in order to try and fund police power, or the sheriff's department, all of the schools, and all of the functions of county government. And what that leaves you with is a very small piece of the pie, and so that the tax burden per capita becomes pretty serious.
Now, the question, I guess the detractors would say is, well, yeah, but you receive PILT funds from the federal government.
Yeah, that's true. We do. We have to fight for them every year. And I probably would burn in flames for this, but I'd rather have, I'd give up the PILT many times over in order to get the access to those federally managed lands so that we have the opportunity to actually harvest the natural resources responsibly, that allows us then to manage our forests and our grazing lands and those kinds of things, so that for ongoing continuity rather than manage them for maximum combustibility the way they're being managed now.
So, Representative Ivory, the Land Access Group has put on rallies here in the state for a number of years, as was alluded to in the story. As a matter of fact, as we tape this, there's going to be yet another one today. How much did that help you and your colleagues in crafting House Bill 148?
Well, Chad, very clear. This is a work that's been coming for a long time. I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people that have been at this. I mean, Senator Lee's been working on things with the roads before he was a senator. Mike Noel in Kane County that has been battling this for a long time. We had other representatives, Chris Herod, Ken Sumption, you know, that have been working on things for a long time. Roger Barris has been a stalwart. We have people going back even before that. You know, Rob Bishop has been on this for a long time. So we are really kind of building on work that's been coming for a long time. But the fact that now we're facing sequestration, we know the federal budgets are absolutely unsustainable. So much of our spending, by some estimates, as much as 40 cents of every dollar we spend is federally sourced, and yet we've got more recoverable oil than the rest of the world combined right here in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. It really is the only solution big enough.
So what's going to be the reaction in Washington, Senator Lee, when this time period passes? I believe it's the end of 2014, and those lands aren't transferred, and then apparently the state's willing to go to court on this. What's your take on that? What do you think is going to happen?
Obviously, different people will have different takes on it. I think those who are from the West, those who are from a public land heavy state like Utah, are going to be far more sympathetic than, for example, those who represent states like New York, where the federal government owns less than 1/2% of the land. But again, this is a part of why we need to educate members of Congress about the disparity. And you know, PILT is significant. PILT, which the commissioner referred to a few minutes ago, stands for Payment in Lieu of Taxes. But the payments that these local governments receive from the federal government in lieu of taxes from the federal government based on the property it owns, it represent a very small fraction of what the county would receive, even if they were taxing that very same land at the lowest rate.
Would but that becomes part of the debate, because the bill very specifically says we're going to keep public lands public, and the state's going to manage them for maximum sustainability. That doesn't seem to solve a property tax problem, though, does it?
You know, let me give you an example on that. And you're right. Federal public lands become state public lands managed for the multiple use, sustained yield with local planning. We just had in our Natural Resources Committee this week, from the report that the Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office did, the case statement on this, $1 invested in energy development by the state yields $45. $1 invested by the federal government in energy resource on public lands yields $5, ninefold in the state in terms of developing the resource. So there's opportunities to lease, to utilize those resources, but then to keep open space and recreation opportunities that are so rich in Utah open. We really can do both.
You look like you had something to say on that.
Well, just that revenue is really key to all of this. Revenue is key to helping people understand the disparity. Once people understand that there is a cost attached to the ownership of public land, whether that's state land or federal land, they'll understand that there needs to be a certain amount of fairness in how the burden associated with that is distributed. Right now, the people in Utah are subsidizing the fact that the whole country might benefit from federally owned public land. That burden ought to be a shared burden. It ought not be focused so exclusively on the residents of states like Utah, where the federal government owns so much land.
Yes, Doug.
The federal government has a real budget problem. A significant part of the monies that the federal government brings for taxes are expended for management of the public lands in the West. In times past, those lands were sometimes managed at a profit. We haven't seen that for years. In fact, they're significant, and this would be a significant tax relief to the eastern states not to have to subsidize us, not only in our PILT and SRS school funds, but also in just the sheer numbers of federal employees that are managing the federal lands at a loss.
Well, do you think that at a county level you can make better land use planning decisions than the federal government?
Without a doubt. And the reason is because the federal government has so much environmental pressure that they are not able to manage the lands other than for preservationist purposes. But we would have the opportunity under local management, under our local general plan, to be able to manage that land so that it actually was good for the land. good for the economics of the area. And they are not incompatible. In fact, they are almost they're interlinked.
You know, let me give you an example. We just had again in our Natural Resources Committee this week, where the wildfires, because of federal policies, we can't touch a tree, even when the beetle kill has gone through and we've got dead trees just standing there, just fuel waiting to burn. And fuel does what fuel does. As it burns through and ravages the forest, kills animals, destroys the air quality, destroys the watershed, when that fire gets to privately managed land where the fuel load has been mitigated, the fire drops to the ground and it's put out time and time again. The federal forests are just ravaged, but where we manage and treat the land and treat that renewable resource as a resource, we also mitigate and seriously reduce the fire load, the watershed damage, the death to animal life, destruction to private property. Those whose lives and livelihoods depend upon the land are more responsible and responsive.
Well, this has been a very good start to a conversation. We're going to take a break here on the county seat. When we come back, we will look at some of the other issues that surround the Public Lands Transfer Act, and we'll talk about some of the management options that would come with that transfer. There's a mechanism that we need to understand. We'll be right back with the county seat in just a minute.
So, what brings you to town?
What brings anyone to St. George? A couple rounds of golf, a little relaxation.
What, is that all?
Is there more? In a retirement community? Should have stuck with the back nine.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
Cedar City, Utah is home of the Tony Award-winning Utah Shakespeare Festival. But did you know that we also offer a different kind of play?
Escape the gray. Head south for clear skies. Cedar City, Bryan Head. It's where play is the thing.
The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration. SITLA manages 3.5 million acres in Utah lands with the express purpose of furthering the education of Utah students while promoting local industry, oil and gas, even residential development, all at the same time. Through the careful use of trust lands, we distributed more than $22 million to Utah schools last year. The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, building the state's permanent school fund.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today is the Transfer of Public Lands Act that was passed last year, and there's legislation coming down the pike in Utah that takes it to the next step that we'll be covering later in our coverage of the legislative session. What I would like to talk about now is the fact that there's more than just Utah's legislation coming down the pike. A lot has changed in the West in the last year as a result of the pioneering that we did with House Bill 148. Representative Ivory, maybe you'd like to address that for us.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. We've been all over the West since the last session. It's been quite a campaign. Been in almost all the mountain states. We've got legislation of various forms modeled after what we did with House Bill 148, pending in Idaho and Nevada. Colorado has a bill that they're moving forward with. Wyoming has a bill that passed their House and passed a Senate committee moving forward. Arizona's working on some commissions to study the same kinds of things we are moving forward that you talked about. So it's exciting. These discussions, this debate is happening, and it's so great to see that happening. People are realizing, look, the promises are the same to us in the states east of Colorado. It's already been done before, and it's the only solution big enough.
Well, you've talked about the fact that there were solutions to similar enabling acts through the Midwest, and you've mentioned before like Illinois and Arkansas and Missouri, and that they had the same problem at the point that they were admitted to the Union, and they got it squared away. That was done legislatively, though, was it not?
Yeah, that's right. And the governor and lieutenant governor messaged this very well. Step one is not litigation. Step one is education, as Senator Lee pointed out, and negotiation. And that's how they succeeded. They brought enough political pressure and weight, understanding that it was the only solution that worked for them. Second step is legislation, and that's just a matter of as Senator Lee mentioned, educating and getting out and working the ground game. So that's what we're doing. And then litigation's an option, and whatever other sovereign actions we can take, those are options down the road, but first step is education.
Senator, do you think there's a chance that we actually can get your colleagues from states in the East that have typically looked at the West as their retreat and playground to actually live up to the Enabling Act and push legislation forward?
I think there is. At the end of the day, I think we face a number of pressures in this country that are going to move us in the direction of exploring new sources of revenue that don't involve borrowing from China, that don't involve taxing hardworking Americans more than we already tax them. I also think that we want them to continue to look at the Rocky Mountains and our state in particular as their playground, as their retreat. That doesn't have to change. That's not going to change simply because we start to revisit the way we've been managing our public lands. What needs to change is that not every decision needs to be made or should be made from Washington. Local people ought to be able to manage their own decisions. Local people ought to be able to access land within their own state.
Do you think that there's some compromise short of actually getting on the same footing as the other states that might achieve that goal without them giving up title?
Look, there are 1,000 ways to address this problem, and not all of them necessarily have to result in each state having exactly the same amount or the same percentage of federal public land. We've got some military installations in our state, which I don't think our state has any problem with. And we've got some national parks and recreation areas in our state that I don't think most people in our state have a problem with. But what we do have to ask is, do we really need the federal government to own 2/3 of our land? Do we really want the federal government to own that land in a sovereign capacity that allows the federal government to say, you can't tax this land and you can't use it without our permission? That's a problem.
And that does become a central key to this whole argument, is the sovereignty, is it not? In the founding of the Constitution, in the writing of it and setting up the country, that was one of the Founding Fathers' primary concerns, was that the federal government not have an advantage over a state by land ownership.
That's right. Elbridge Gerry, the delegate to the Constitutional Convention of 1787 from Massachusetts, made this point in September of 1787 that if we allow Congress to buy up unlimited amounts of federal land within a state's boundaries, and if we give Congress the power to be the sole sovereign lawmaking authority over that land, in time, the state would become subservient to the federal government in a way that would be utterly incompatible with the spirit and letter of the Constitution.
That's a very good argument, a good place to stop on our debate here. When we come back, we will take a look at perhaps what might happen if it does go to court. And we'll be back with the county seat in just a minute.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure. It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Miller County.
Whatever your meeting needs may be, Sevier County is perfect. The brand new fairgrounds facility includes a large meeting hall, breakout rooms, and a perfect kitchen facility to feed just a few or hundreds. The county also boasts the Sevier Valley Center on the campus of Snow College Richfield. This facility includes an arena and numerous breakout rooms that can be used for any type of meeting, conference, or event. When planning your next meeting or conference, consider placing it in the center of it all, Sevier County.
I remember the first time that our family found that canyon road. I thought, here we go again, another road to nowhere. But boy, was I wrong. It was 9 Mile Canyon, and what we saw was more than I could ever have expected. At the end of the day, my son asked,
Mom, can we come back here again?
That was all I needed to hear.
What happens in Utah's castle country stays with you. Find out more at castlecountry.com.
Let's be honest, you don't know much about Beaver County. Well, let me tell you about it. It's the birthplace of outlaw Butch Cassidy and adventurer Philo T. Farnsworth. Some of the best skiing in Utah is at Eagle Point. You've got camping, Canyon Breeze Golf Course, Crusher and the Tushers, Beaver Territorial Courthouse, snowmobiling, Renewable Energy, Pioneer Car Show, Squeaky Cheese, Ghost Towns to explore, best water in the country, Paiute ATV trails, Old Frisco Kilns, horse racing, hunting, fishing, and it's a good place to live. Beaver County, mountains of fun. I could tell you more, but why don't you come and see it for yourself?
Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today has been the Transfer of Public Lands Act. We've gone through quite a bit. The last question that I want to ask, because this is the one that I hear the most from people, particularly detractors, they say, Utah's wasting its money. There's no foundation for this argument if it goes to court. We'll be throwing good money after bad, and it's unwinnable. It's untenable. What is your answer to that?
Well, number one, we can't afford not to. We're in a situation that, from a budget standpoint, we've got the resource if we have the will. But it's already been done before, Chad. And then there's a great white paper on the American Lands Council website, americanlandscouncil.org, done by a law professor in Southern California. And he shows how historically, legally, constitutionally, our promises are the same to all the states east of Colorado, where the federal government obligated itself to dispose of title. We gave it clear title at statehood so that it could dispose, so that 5% of those proceeds would benefit our school children, and then we would have the ability to tax the land and be able to provide essential government services going forward. Promises are the same, Chad.
And they didn't live up to it?
Not to ours so far. We're still 2/3 of our land controlled by the federal government. We're waiting for them to keep the same promise to Utah they already kept with all the states east of Colorado.
Well, Senator Lee, you said that Washington hasn't paid much attention, but do they have an obligation here?
I think so, and I think regardless, it's going to become increasingly evident that the state of Utah and its government are ready to deal with this problem, a problem that is long overdue for some kind of remedy. It's Washington, D.C. that needs to get its act together. It's Washington, D.C. that needs to recognize the fact something needs to be done here. We've racked up, through our federal government, $16.5 trillion in debt. We're adding to that debt at a rate of more than $1 trillion every single year. We've got some choices to make about how we get out of that. Some have suggested just cutting defense and eviscerating our ability to protect ourselves. Others have suggested let's borrow more from the Chinese. Others are suggesting let's tax an already overtaxed American people even more than we are now. I think we owe the American people more than that, and I think we need to look at some of the resources that we have. We can manage these resources, we can utilize them to our benefit in a manner that is environmentally responsible, but we need to act, and we need to get out of this mindset that says only the federal government may own and manage federal public lands, and it must do so in the way that it has been for a long time.
I think that's a good place to wrap up. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you for allowing us into your home today for the county seat. We appreciate the time that you take to become involved in your local government issues. These are important to you. They affect your life the most. We urge you to tell your friends about this program and invite them to watch it again on thecountyseat.tv. Thanks for being with us. We'll look for you next week on The County Seat.